Good evening, everyone. This is Ashton, Red Modeling Paint Studio, doing a paint cast tonight for you guys. We're going to be working on Bradigus. Working specifically tonight on making these stones look like they glow. So here is how Bradigus looks right now, and a little example right here of what we're going to be doing tonight, creating this green inner glow effect on the stones that'll be attached to his cloak and base and all around. So he is about done. I don't need to do much more work on him at this point. So now it's just kind of wrapping up the basing. The other thing I'm hoping to get to tonight, if I have some time, is working a little bit more on the bronze back that I was working on the other night. It's had plenty of time to dry now, and so I kind of want to move on to some other things with him. So if we have time tonight, we'll be getting to that. So let's just go ahead and get right into it here. A couple things just to go over real fast. A lot of guys ask about the toothpicks, you know, on my model pieces and stuff, and what it is that I have going on there. This is what I do when I paint. Okay, I like to paint in pieces. I grew up building model cars, model planes, things like that, and with those types of things, you don't paint it all at once. You know, if you really want it to look nice, you paint the cockpit separate from the fuselage, separate from the armaments, and that's kind of the same approach that I take to miniatures as well. And so when I look at a miniature that I'm going to paint, I break it down into pieces, and I often paint it that way. And even if you look at my Reckoner that I'm working on right now, you know, there's all the pieces to the Reckoner that will all be painted individually. So it's just kind of my way of doing it. But what I'll do is I'll put these pieces on a toothpick, okay, and then I'll drill a hole into the piece. I'll cut the tip of the toothpick off, and then I'll jam the toothpick up into the hole, and that creates enough tension to hold the piece in place. Then I'll take some blister foam or foam from the insert from a carry case, our tray, and then I just take the sharp end of the toothpick and jam these right in like so, and there you have it, holding your pieces for you while they're drying, and it makes airbrushing a lot easier to do. You can also, if you've got like a Home Depot or something like that around you, you can also buy like that pink or blue insulating foam, the real thick stuff that a lot of guys use for making terrain. Cut yourself a small piece of it and you can do the same thing. So pretty easy. So let's talk about how we're going to paint these pieces now. They have been primed and ready to go. What I am going to be doing tonight is we're going to first start by establishing or spraying the OSL pattern with an airbrush, and then by hand we'll paint the rock detail. So these areas here in between the glyphs is where I'm trying to create an inner glowing type effect, okay? And to do that, we're going to be using 3 primary colors. Well, actually, I'm probably only going to be airbrushing 2 colors, and the third color will probably be done with a hand brush, the typical brush work. But we're looking at P3 Moral White and P3 Necrotite Green. So the other thing I'm doing too, because these are smaller, tighter areas, is I'm switching to my smaller detail airbrush, okay? The Owada Eclipse is what I use for my workhorse. It's got a 0.35 millimeter needle in it. That's what I do all my base coating with and some detail work. But when I'm wanting to get into small, tighter areas, I use a Harder & Steinbeck Infinity with a 0.2 millimeter needle. That's my go-to for that. So I'm just going to mix up my paint here real quick. I'm starting with Necrotite Green. I've already got my air compressor on. I'll turn my hood on here in just a second. You guys have any questions? For those of you in chat, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them up in the chat room, and as I get time, I will answer them. Also, let me know, guys, if the music's too loud or distracting. I can turn that down a little bit. Just uploaded a couple more videos to my YouTube channel today, so you go over there and check those out. Some Wrath of Kings stuff that I was working on. Tonight I'm going to be uploading the Bronzeback video and the Imperatus video that I was working on the other night, on Tuesday night I think it was. Maybe that was Monday night, I can't quite remember. No, it was Monday night. Yeah. Okay. And at this point with the Necrotite Green, don't necessarily worry about trying to create any type of glowing effect. All you're doing is just creating a solid base coat at this point. But try and keep the area that you're spraying condensed or small. I've got this Necrotite Green pretty thinned out right now too, and that's because I don't want it to be too overpowering at this point. So I'm working slowly on building the glowing effect that I'm trying to achieve. Again, just work on trying to establish that solid base coat, solid coverage. We'll worry about creating contrast here in a minute. Necrotite Green is such a saturated color that you really have to be careful when you apply it, because it goes on so thin that if you try and put too much on at one time, you're going to get a lot of runs in the paint. I mean, I'm only pulling this trigger back, maybe 10%, 15% at the most. Just really slowly building up that layer. Okay, start building up a second layer here on some of the pieces. Sorry, went off camera there for a second. Okay, so we got a nice even coat on all these pieces. All right, that's exactly what we're looking for. Just emptying out my airbrush here. Going to give it a quick cleaning, quick rinsing. And then we're going to move on to the Morrow White. And the idea behind the Morrow White is we're just going to spray the Morrow White in the center of these green, bright green colors that we just put on. Almost done, guys. 1 second here. Cleaning airbrushes makes for great broadcast. Okay, mix up some Morrow White now. Okay, so I've got the white ready, and you can see the green there a little bit on my hand. Essentially what we're going to do is just put a small dot of white in the center of each of these larger sides of the block. I'm not going to try putting it into each little glyph area there. That would just be too unreasonable with an airbrush at this point. There may be those that could do it, but I'm not one of them. Someone in chat is asking what model I'm working on. I'm working on Privateer Press Circle Ouroboros. Bradigus, the Warcaster Bradigus. Keep my airbrush out of the camera so it stays on focus here. Okay, that one looks alright. Okay. Move on to this one now. Got a little too heavy on that one. That's alright though. Okay. So that's most likely it for the airbrushing. Let me clean my brush real quick. Someone's also asking about cleaning and setup on an airbrush. Questions like that. I actually did a fairly in-depth one a little while back on a video that I did. I believe it was airbrushing purple cricks, if I remember right. Part 1. If you go onto my YouTube channel, you have to, when you go on YouTube, you have to search for me under Ashton Holbrook, my name, not Red Finger or not Red Modeling. And I believe it was yeah, Painting Purple Cricks Part 1, and I went over quite a bit on some of the details of airbrushing. You know, if you're thinking of getting one, I mean, if you're seriously interested in it, I'd really recommend getting yourself a quality brush. You don't want to start with a cheapie. I'd make sure you had a quality airbrush compressor. You don't want a compressor that's going to turn on and off on you, you know, every 30 seconds. You want one that's going to give you a nice, consistent flow of air. Real important. And yeah, there's a ton of information out there on the internet about airbrushing, and you know, more than what I can share in just the few minutes that I'm doing this. But airbrushes are good. It's a great way to. It's a great tool to supplement your work. It's not a be-all and end-all by any means, but it is great for speeding some things up. Okay, let me turn off my compressor, and let me get my wet palette, and we'll start getting some brush work done here. Okay. Alright, so now what we want to do is create, you know, a stone look here, okay? But the problem is the whole thing is painted, you know, green at this point. So the question is, you know, how do we get from where we are now to what we want to have? And Bastion Gray is the color that I'm going to be using for the base on the stone. And what we're going to do is just paint the upper surfaces of all these rock pieces here in Bastion Gray, like so. Okay, so you can see more or less now how I've kind of got this gray happening now, you know, on just those outer pieces there. There is a little bit of a touch-up I need to do here real quick. Just give me 1 second. Got some of the gray paint on the green. What I'm doing is putting just a little bit of Mara white onto my wet palette, a little bit of necrotite green onto my wet palette, and just kind of eyeballing the shade that I need to create. So if you look right there, excuse me, right there, you can see the little mistake that I made. So making sure the paint has a little bit of moisture in it. And I'm just going to touch that up. Might take a couple coats depending on how thin the paint is, but you guys get the idea. Alright, now if we're going to sell this this green glow effect, we need to add a little more contrast to it. Right now it's just kind of plain. Plain, highly saturated, and excuse me, highly desaturated. And so what we want to do is saturate this this color a little more. So Iosin green is what you're going to go to for that. And just get a little bit of that on your wet palette. Thin it out just a touch. See what I got going on my hand there. And then just go into these corners here and paint some of that in there, following the edge of the rock. Yeah, it looks like a little bit of it is still wet there, that's okay. And leave the center of each of these spots untouched. If you want to up the contrast again a little further, take some of your Mara white, the touch of the necrotite green, mix that up, and just kind of paint it in the central areas. Again, we're looking for, you know, a nice tabletop quality here, so don't worry too much if your blends are a little rough. But you can see that glow effect starting to happen, starting to take place. Some discussion on chat about wet palettes. Let me just look this over real quick. I want to make sure you guys are on the right page with how to use your wet palettes. Korsek, Star Wars fan obviously, says, I have a really hard time keeping the paper on my wet palette wet. The edges curl up and after an hour or so it stops being a wet palette. I love that when I start using it after it's been sealed for a couple days, but I can't keep it that way during the painting session. Drolath is chiming in, flip the paper over. Once you get both sides wet, it tends to stay down better. You still have to futz with it a little to get it to lay down though. Yes, this is all true. You guys are on the right page with that. Korsek replies, I tend to set up the new piece of paper when I finish for the day, so when I come back it's sealed and so it's good. Not bad. That's a good idea. Now, my question to Korsek would be, what kind of paper are you using for your wet palette? Because that's going to influence what how it behaves for you. Personally, I use baking paper. You go to the grocery store and go to the baking supply aisle, and you can get baking paper, rolls of baking paper. They're made by Reynolds. They usually come in a blue and white box, and it's like a big roll of, like what you'd find aluminum foil in, but it's baking paper instead. It's got pictures of cookies on top of it. And anyway, that's what I use for my wet palette, and I do have that initial curling that you're talking about, but some of these other issues that you're mentioning of it drying out is not anything I've experienced with that. Oh yeah, Corsac. Don't use that Privateer Press wet palette sheets. They are crap. Yeah. Get yourself the baking paper, and your life will become dramatically more easy when it comes to wet paletting. Nothing wrong with their wet palette case. I think the case is fine. I'm even thinking of picking one up just for a smaller case for like when I travel and stuff. But yeah, the paper is crap. Total crap. So you come onto the show and you learn something new, man. Right there, getting that question answered is worth the price of admission, right? Yeah, parchment paper, someone's asking in chat if parchment paper is the same as baking paper. Yes, it is. If you've got a Walmart near you, they carry it. Most of your grocery stores will carry it. fact, let me finish this piece here, and let me go over to my cupboard, and I'll grab what it is that I use, guys. I'll show it to you. Okay, hang tight 1 second, guys. I'll be right back. Let me go grab it. Okay, this is what I'm using, guys. It's called Reynolds Cookie Baking Sheets, okay? And what I do is I get the pre-cut sheets, okay? They're 12 by 16 inches, all right? And then I've got a paper cutter that I use, and I cut them, the sheets down into, you know, roughly a, what is this, a 4 by 3 or 3 by 5 type size piece of parchment paper. So I've got everything already pre-cut and ready to go. I've got a whole stack of these sitting right here at my desk. Okay, and that's just kind of how I run with it. I decided to switch to the sheets of it because the sheets don't roll quite as bad as the actual roll of baking paper. So of course, you know, your mileage may vary, but this is the stuff I use, and I love it. I've been getting a lot of use out of it. Okay, let me tighten back up here. Back into blending this OSL effect a little more. Alright, I'm not going to work on all these pieces right now live on the camera because I don't want to bore you guys with that. So what I'm going to do is set those aside, and those will just be worked on over the next few days.